Well, hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graben. Our guest today is Brion Hurley. We share in some ways professional background and in some ways we don't, but we'll explore that today. He has a company called Business Performance Improvement. He's a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. He's the host of two podcasts, one called Lean Six Sigma Bursts, and there's another called Lean Six Sigma for Good, and he's doing a book series of that same title. The first edition, I made a mistake there. What's the word, Brion, before I welcome you formally?
Volume.
Volume. The first volume is available, and he's working on more. Lean Six Sigma for Good. So we'll talk about that later, but the thing we're going to delve into first, I think is interesting, is that Brion was a place kicker in what we would just call football. For a global audience, we'll call it American football. He was at the University of Iowa. He kicked in some preseason games for the New York Giants, and he played a number of seasons in different arena football leagues. So with that, Brion, let me say welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Great. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, this is something I don't talk too much about, is my college days and playing football at the University of Iowa. So when I look back at my playing days over the years, I think what stands out to me was my mistake around how I practiced. And as you mentioned, I was a place kicker, and I also did some punting, but it's really where the place kicking that I had a lot of ups and downs. And I look back at the way I practiced in my kata, if you want to call it that, from the lean terminology, was flawed. And I think that led to a lot of that inconsistency.
And kata, sorry to interrupt, but kata is a word that could mean like routine, basically.
like practice routine that you go through every day. And with sports, that's very common. Most people have a practice routine they follow. And I thought I had a good one. You know, there was some logic behind it, but I think that was part of the issue that I struggled with through my career. So what I ended up doing was thinking that, you know, as I was developing and working out and trying to improve, that the farther I could kick the football, the better. And so I practiced a lot of long field goals. So I'd go back to as far back as I could physically kick it. And I figured if I made those kicks, then everything shorter than that would be a piece of cake, right? Yeah. It's closer and it's easier, right? And so I spent a lot of time kicking 50, 55-yard field goals as my practice. And I would spend the majority of the time. You know, I'd do a little warm up, but go straight to the long kicks. What happened, and so that thinking that this would lead to success in the short term and the shorter kicks did not pan out. I struggled. So I ended up in my freshman year of college, I redshirted, which means you take a year off and you get kind of acclimated to academics, and then you still have 4 years of eligibility. So
and you can still practice in a redshirt year. You just don't play in the games.
Exactly.
The rules
Everything's
at the time.
the same. Yeah, you just don't play in a game. And most freshmen do that in football because it's such a physical sport. And other positions besides place kicker, it's a very physical sport, and you need the extra year of weight training and adding on weight and all that. So I think 1 or 2 players on my class actually played that year, most redshirt. So that's pretty typical. So I worked out and I got better and ended up playing. But then in my second year, I ended up losing my job. And that was due to inconsistencies. So I could make a really good kick and then the next one shank it or miss it badly.
From those shorter ranges of what, like 35?
Shorter range
40?
Primarily.
Yeah, 35, I guess, is it's short to mid-range for college kickers, right?
Yeah, so most of the kicks take place inside 40 yards. But that's not where I was spending my time practicing. And so it didn't translate. That's what happened. I was, focused on so much on the long kicks that I didn't really study and think about when I missed them. I just thought, oh, I'll just hit it. I'll just try again. And I never really studied the perfecting that technique to be really, really consistent about that. So I think that was one, problem I have. And so I ended up losing my job twice while I was at Iowa, and got relegated to doing only long field goals for my last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really difficult experience to go through. But I still think it didn't sink in right away that it was my practice routine that was causing that. So looking back, if I had to do it over again, I would have changed up my approach on how I practiced, and gotten more consistent, which is the most important thing for a place kicker, is to be consistent on the makeable kicks.
Yeah.
Not, and I did make some long kicks. It did work out at times, but not to the point where you're going to be the starting kicker on all the kicks.
Yeah. I mean, so you had your routines that you developed. I'm curious, because there are other, it's not like an NFL team where there's only one kicker on the roster at a time. College teams have, including walk-ons, 3, maybe 4 kickers.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got a special teams coach who may or may not be a kicking expert. Like, so I know we might get into a little bit of Big Ten talk. At Northwestern, my alma mater, the special teams coach is the head coach who played linebacker. I don't know if he's ever kicked a football in his life. So I guess my question is, like, how much is it a matter of figuring it out yourself, learning from what the other kickers are doing? Like, how much do you compare notes, and how much coaching were you getting?
Yeah, it varied. I had coaches that had very little experience with kicking, and then some had a little bit of experience. But most of the time, there is very little experience from the coaching standpoint. You're on your own. You're doing it based on your own experience and what you've learned in practice. Sorry, I'm getting some dog noises in the background.
Yeah, sorry. That happens these days. I can edit that out a little bit.
Quiet the whole time today. All right. I think he's all right.
Here, let's just leave a little silence, because then it'll be easier to find it.
All right, just a second.
Okay, that'll help me find it. So, do you want to start from the beginning of the answer to the question of figuring out yourself, other kickers, coaching? Why don't you just start again?
Okay. So most of the time, the coach does not have much experience with kicking. It's a very individualized technique and skill. And most people either learn it on their own through trial and error, or they have a kicking coach that they work with, or they go to kicking camps, and that's where they pick up techniques. And then they just kind of practice by themselves, which is, it's nice that you can do that, but it also is, you can get into some bad habits too that you don't know. So I had some coaches that had a little bit of knowledge, and some that had very little knowledge, but that's very, very typical that most of the coaches don't have a lot of experience. They're not, it's not as prevalent as it is now that you actually have a kicking coach that the team provides.
And I imagine there's an interesting dynamic where you're teammates, but you're competing for a job. As you mentioned, you kind of win the job, lose the job. You're practicing the same set of uprights. I'm just trying to think through the dynamic of, you want to watch each other, but how much cooperation and help is there?
Yeah. My best friends are actually the other people I was competing with, my place kicker and punter friends. So interesting that we hung out so much that we became really close and formed a good bond, even though we were competing with each other for playing time.
Yeah.
And at first I didn't know how that was going to go, because in high school, there wasn't a lot of competition for the job. But it was interesting. It was very much individualized. We all know we were competing against ourselves, that if it wasn't the other person's fault, it was our own fault if we didn't do well enough. And we all had opportunities. It wasn't like someone was perfect and you could never beat them out. You had opportunities, and you just didn't execute on that. So it worked out very strange that was closest bonds were the people we competing against. Now, I wouldn't say that we shared tips or gave advice to each other, but definitely they're the closest people on my team that I still stay in contact with. People who I lost my job to, or I beat them out for their job. And you would think that they would hold grudges, or there would be animosity there, but it's not the case. And I think that goes to the, how the personality types of everybody, but also the team environment, that as long as we're winning and we're doing well, no one wants to be the one that's to blame for mistakes or costing the game. So if the team's winning and if there's someone better that can do the job than you and it helps the team win, then that's kind of the attitude that most people take. So that's pretty healthy.
Because, and for comparison, I'm going to come back to the Big Ten thing, because the funny small world almost connection, because Brian and I have known each other for a couple years in professional circles, and then I learned that you had kicked at Iowa, and it was at the same years that I was a student. I was playing drums in the marching band at Northwestern. So for those 4 years that our teams played each other every year, we were in the same approximate location. In fact, I was actually on the field once at Kinnick Stadium, but I was there as a visiting marching band member when you were on the roster. But when you were playing for Iowa, Northwestern was terrible those years. We were winning maybe 3 games a year. Iowa, you had an expectation of going to a bowl game, maybe going to the Rose Bowl. So maybe that helped with the competitive dynamic of, well, there's some benefit, even if you're not the starting kicker, to, let's say, this bowl trip or the excitement of being on a winning team. It would be a mistake to undercut each other, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's just like in business, I think there's a lot of commonality there with the leaders and the coaches and how they set the tone for that. And so I had a coach that I played for was Hayden Fry, and he's very well known, legendary coach. And that's how he operated was, and he had a lot of success doing it that way. So that carried through to the players. And so, and I think what happened at Northwestern was actually during my time when Northwestern pulled off what I think was maybe the most unbelievable turnaround of any sports team. Because I remember growing up, it was a guaranteed win when Iowa played Northwestern, and scores of 50-0, were very common. And to see them evolve over those couple of years. So the first 2 years we won, and the second 2 years we lost, and it ended a 20-some game losing streak, Northwestern. And it was the culture that Gary Barnett set up there was amazing. And I think it started that we will win and we'll have an attitude that we were not going to lose. And on the other team, when you see that happen game after game, they keep pulling out victories despite what looks like a loss they're going to have. They gain confidence around that. And the opponent starts to think, uh-oh, here it goes again. They're going to pull out another one. And the psychology around that is so critical in sports that it's the physical part is important, but the mental part is almost more important, because you can get in your own head and you can start to think differently, and it changes how you behave and how you perform. And it's such an important part, but I was on the bad side of that whole transformation. And I saw it firsthand, but looking back, it was very impressive what happened there.
Yeah. Cause I graduated in June of 95, and it was the fall of 95 when Northwestern had their amazing Rose Bowl run. And I don't have any close connections to him. I tried reaching out once to Coach Barnett to try to see if he would be a guest on this podcast. But there's a story, thinking back to Coach Fry, and we talk about mistakes. This may have been, I don't know, a mistake on his part, because it was one of those, I'm sure, blowout victories. Yep. And reportedly, I wasn't there. So reportedly, allegedly, Coach Fry came to shake hands with Coach Barnett on the field after the game and said something to the effect of, "I hope our boys didn't hurt your boys too bad," or something like that. Well, that really got under Gary Barnett's skin. And I think Pat Fitzgerald, our current coach, who was a player on those teams, Iowa went from our perspective to being just one of the other schools that kicks our butts most of the time, to being this red letter hated rival. And to this day, I think Northwestern gets up more for that Iowa game, maybe because of some of that history. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a show. Since that time, that rivalry has been very even over the years, from 95 through current day. Those games are competitive and close for the most part. And I think Pat Fitzgerald being on that team and being part of that transformation and carrying that over into the attitude and culture in Northwestern has been part of that dramatic change. And yeah, so it definitely starts at the top and how people think and behave, and it lines up nicely with all the work we do with continuous improvement and every day getting a little bit better than the day before. And so the tie-in with business and sports is very close in my mind.
Yeah. So I want to come back to, some of your thoughts on the lessons learned. I mean, I as an observer watching the Northwestern football program, you could see that as a turnaround situation. And like my first job right out of college at General Motors was a losing team. It was the Northwestern Wildcats of the time of building car engines. And we got a new plant manager, which is kind of the equivalent of a head coach. And so I've seen reinforced in different settings a head coach who's had success somewhere else. Yep. Because Gary Barnett had been an assistant coach on a national championship team at Colorado. He knew what a winning culture was. Yep. And when you bring in that type of leader, whether it's into a car plant or into a football locker room, it takes time because that culture change is not easy, to say the least. But it's doable with the right kind of leadership. So I find that kind of an optimistic, hopeful thing for a lot of organizations. But I wanted to ask you, Brion.
I actually want to add on that because when I grew up in Iowa City, where the University of Iowa is located. And I was born in 74. So in 79, Hayden Fry was brought in to be the coach at Iowa. 20 straight years of losing season at Iowa. And he had a different attitude, and he had turned around a few other programs, and he did the exact same thing. In 3 years, they were in the Rose Bowl. And so as far as I, was old enough to remember football, he was the coach there. And so he did the same thing 20 years earlier with his transformation at Iowa too. So, and it started from the top and how he ran his program and how he delegated to his assistants, and he set the vision and just kept the attitude high with the players. And then he worked with his assistant coaches. That's where he spent most of his time, developing the assistant coaches. Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting story too, to kind of grow up that way and then end up playing and seeing just the turnaround that happened there too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I thought of Hayden Fry in Iowa with the end results. I didn't know the turnaround story. I was born in 1973. I was a kid. The big program where I grew up, University of Michigan, has been mostly dominant almost forever, with a few bad stretches here and there that occur. So Wisconsin at one point with Barry Alvarez was also a turnaround story, which is easy to forget.
And he was the assistant coach at Iowa under Fry. And he probably learned a lot from that turnaround and brought that to Wisconsin. And their program is, I hate to talk about these other schools that irritate me, but the turnarounds at those programs is very impressive. And what they've done in Wisconsin is amazing. So, and that goes to Barry Alvarez and his philosophy, but I'm sure he picked up some things being on Hayden Fry's staff.
So now I think we'll jump to the business connections. I've got another kicking question I want to ask you, but there's that turnaround, and then there's sustaining the improvement, which connects to the work that we do, where Gary Barnett, after bringing the Northwestern program to the Rose Bowl, they had another great season the year after. He stumbled a little bit for 2 seasons. Then he left and took the head coaching job back home in Colorado. That, I think, was a really important inflection point for Northwestern, where it could have been like, well, those 2 years were a blip, and now we've gone back to what our state in the football pecking order had always been. Yep. But they brought in another coach, Randy Walker, who had been successful at Miami of Ohio. He then brought them back up to a sustained, like going to a bowl game was now kind of an expectation, not the rare event. And then when Pat Fitzgerald became head coach, I'm fortunate as an alum and as a fan that there really was this step function improvement in the level of performance at Northwestern. And there's risk in organizations we've seen in different types where, let's say in a hospital, they make great improvement, new CEO comes in, they go back to the old playbook, and the Lean Six Sigma efforts or some of those results that are maybe more important can be temporary. I don't know if you've seen similar situations in the business world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it becomes there was, in my past work, I worked at an aerospace company for 18 years, and they started Lean probably about 1 to 2 years before I started working there. And there was a big inflection point about year 3 or 4 where they said, I think we got this Lean thing down. We can kind of delegate this back out to the departments. We don't need a central organization to manage this. And I think it was a really critical point. It didn't sustain. CEO kind of realized that after about another couple years and reinvigorated it again. And then I think it kind of maintained that level. So it did dip a little bit. I think they were premature to kind of claim success on their Lean journey and think it was all embedded and ingrained in the culture yet. So it was a little early, but luckily they made a correction and got it back on track. And maybe that's an analogy back to like Michigan, who is not doing as well as people are expecting to. And so maybe they're going to make a correction to try and get back onto the path that they want to be on. But I think those inflection points are really important to be able to decide either we're going to stick with this, what we're currently doing, or we need to change, or we are going to get left behind, or our competition is going to beat us, or our competitors are going to continue to beat us. So, yeah.
So, while I've got you, I do want to ask another football question when it comes to kicking and the idea of pressure situations, game-winning kicks. Okay, not against Northwestern, but in other games, did you ever have the opportunity for a game-winning kick, make or miss? What happened? What did you learn from that?
Yeah, so I had 2 attempts. First one was in high school. I think we were down by a point or 2. And I was really excited. This is my junior year, and we didn't attempt very many field goals. I kept waiting and hoping for those attempts, but this one was set up nicely for a kick because we were down by 1 or 2 and time was running out and you almost had no choice but to kick a field goal. So, and the kick got blocked and someone got through and cleanly blocked it. And there really wasn't a good shot at me getting the kickoff. So that was pretty disheartening because, those things are really good for the resume and to get attention of schools. And so I was really selfishly looking for an opportunity to make a game-winning field goal.
Right.
So, just trying to deal with it, I guess I was frustrated with how it turned out like that, but I just kind of go back to say, is there anything I could have done differently? And I think everything I did was correct. And I thought I handled the pressure okay. I didn't feel super nervous. So I think I still took a good positive away from it. Had I missed it and had been clean, and maybe I would have reacted differently or had to deal with it a lot differently than that.
So you're saying there, it's not like it wasn't a low kick. I mean, even though the kicker, you think of it as such an individual thing, there's a team effort there between the snap, the blocking, the hold.
Yep.
That was one where you could say, not your fault.
Yeah, a field goal is really 3 key people. It's the snapper, holder, and the kicker itself. And any one of those can cause problems for the others, right? And so, plus you have your 8 other players blocking and trying to keep people out, which in that case didn't happen. But yeah, it wasn't a low kick. Someone cleanly got through. And so I think I took away a positive because I didn't see that I could have done anything better or different in that situation. But it was a good experience to go through that for the first time.
Yeah. And then what level was the other kick?
I didn't have any attempts in college that were considered game winning or game critical. There's a lot of misses that I had that I think were pivotal points in the game, but not like fourth quarter late in the game. So I took different things off of those misses. But later when I played arena football, it was I got a road game to San Jose. So we ended up going down and had a last minute field goal to win the game. And there's actually a little bit more time on the clock. And if you've ever been to arena football game, that's plenty of time to score a couple of times.
Yeah. If there's 2 seconds on the clock, yeah.
That's plenty of time for a touchdown or a couple plays maybe.
Right.
So I think there's maybe still 20 seconds left. And so the other team got the ball and had a chance to try a field goal, and they end up missing the field goal at the end. So technically I had a game-winning field goal, but also the other kicker missed theirs as well. That could have been the game-winning field goal. So that was my only actual one that got off clean.
And so I think it's interesting. You're talking about thinking back to the work that we do now. You think about process and you talk about results. There could be times where you as the kicker could have followed your process and done everything right and maybe not get a good result.
Yep.
There could be maybe on the flip side where maybe there's something more fluky where like a kick is low and it would have been going left, but somebody tips it and now it ends up going through the uprights. It maybe doesn't happen as often, but
yeah, I've had a tipped PAT extra point go through. Maybe it would have, I don't know if I would have missed it necessarily, but yeah, some fluky things happen, or hits the crossbar at the wrong angle and it bounces backwards or bounces in. There's some good videos you can look at, strange field goals that hit goalposts and crossbars and stuff. And that's never a good sound to hear as a kicker, or the ball hitting a crossbar. Usually it's not a good result.
Well, here's a random question. So I remember one game when I was a student at Northwestern, any win was precious. And there was a chance for a game-winning field goal, probably time expiring, against Michigan State. And the kicker, Brion Leahy, who is related to Pat Leahy, who kicked in the NFL for quite a while, the kick went over the upright. It went over the goalpost. So it was so high. And then it becomes a judgment call of the referees looking up. The game, I don't think, was even televised. There certainly wasn't going to be any instant replay. And Northwestern fans to this day say that the ref blew the call. Yeah. And so I guess it kind of begs the question of like, why are the goalposts not taller to the point where that just wouldn't even be an issue?
Yeah, I don't know. And in fact, that game-winning kick I had was over the top of the arena uprights. And so it could have been a judgment call. They could have said that was too close to where we think the line would have extended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that happened a lot in arena, and it happens a lot in regular football. The ball, if you look at the path, I'd say over half the kicks are over the uprights. Mm-hmm. And so they need to go much higher up so that there's less ambiguity in the decisions about whether the ball actually went through the uprights or not. Yeah. It's definitely a challenge, and I wish they would add on another 10 feet at least.
Yeah. Because I mean, who cares about aesthetics? I mean, if you look at the foul poles at baseball games, I mean, those extend all the way up to the upper deck in a lot of cases. You could eliminate some of that possibility of a referee mistake.
Exactly.
Yep. Maybe I need to get a referee on the podcast at some point. Maybe a retired referee. I don't know if they would be willing to admit mistakes. But, I think of those pressure situations, a couple other athletes that I've interviewed, you face, like if I make a mistake at work, I don't have 80,000 people seeing it in person, yet alone how many on TV. And I'm not getting ripped on social media.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, because like you played in the mid 90s. What are your thoughts now of like, kind of, it's going to be a leading question, but the unfortunate situation where people are idiots on Twitter and are being abusive, if not threatening, to a college kid who missed a kick?
Yeah. I mean, it was, like I said, I didn't have a game where it was clearly my fault we lost. So I didn't have to deal with that in the stadium or people I run into. That was the way you got feedback on stuff like that. Would yell out something, right? And I've been booed by my own fans before. So that thickens the skin really quickly. And we have great fans, but at times I deserve to be booed, right? So, and so you deal with that, and that makes you tougher, and that gets you motivated to not have that happen again. And that drives your practice and your desire to improve. So, but on the same side, I don't know how they can deal with that today. I mean, I think about what would happen, you know, if social media was around back then and anyone could say whatever they want to the players. You know, it was bad enough on the field, and just knowing that it was going in the paper the next day, and that you have to watch the film on Monday and rewatch it over and over again, the mistakes you made. You dreaded that, and you just want to curl up and go to sleep and not see anybody, and hopefully that time passes by and they forget what happened. So it was the most amazing experience, and it also was like the most stressful experience I've ever been through. So everything pretty much pales in comparison to what I went through then. Business situations, I still get nervous about things, but I always think back to, this is really not the same as, you know, being in front of 70,000 people and trying to perform, and they're all watching you. And if you screw up, they're all going to know it. So the business situations are much easier to deal with. So I think that did help me a lot with dealing with pressure and learning how to relax and control and not get too excited or too down. So that was a great takeaway from, you know, playing sports. But yeah, that was tough. It was, I wouldn't change it, but there were some things that were really difficult to go through.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing and reflecting on some of that. And again, like, I mean, the kicker is one part of the puzzle. You know, I blogged years ago. I had a chance to go to a Fiesta Bowl game in Arizona. It was Stanford against Oklahoma State. And the Stanford kicker missed a 35-yard kick at the end of regulation. And then he missed a 43-yarder in overtime, and they lost. And there was, you know, a lot of just, you know, over-the-top criticism of the kicker. And then you read about what happened. The snap was a little bit offline. The holder did his best to gather it in. And then, I don't know if this is a thing, like for those of us who just know from the movie Ace Ventura, when they say laces out, the laces were in. And like, so there are all these different factors that could have thrown off the kicker's timing. The ball wasn't held properly, but yet the kicker gets blamed.
Yep. And that's goes with the role, right? The job is the least physically demanding in terms of, like, you're not tackling people or being tackled, which everyone else has to deal with. So the perk is you don't have to go through all of that, but the other side of it is you take on all the glory if you do well, and you take the blame if you mess up. They're not going to see the holder didn't do their job, or the snapper or some lineman let someone in and get their hand on it. It's sometimes hard to tell what went wrong exactly. So that kind of comes with the territory. But yeah, you know, I have friends that played in the NFL many years, and 3 of them had very high profile misses in playoff games, and they received death threats multiple times from fans, you know. And so it's sad that that's where people take out their frustrations and do stuff like that. And they're so wrapped up maybe in the sports that they would threaten people's lives over a game. So that's disheartening that, you know, people are like that. And that was even kind of pre social media, or is this kind of mid 2000s and stuff. And they all went through very difficult times just trying to recover from that, because, you know, their team didn't go to the Super Bowl or didn't go to the next round of the playoffs. And that also end up getting in their, you know, probably hurting their chances of sticking around for another year. And to see what they went through, it was like, I don't know if it was worth it. That's, you know, the money's good, but man, that's a lot to deal with. And it's almost like some post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't want to try to equate it to stuff like that, but there is a lot of mental strain that gets put on people like that. And then to have it added on top where people are threatening your family and stuff, that's just uncalled for.
Totally. And you know, fan is short for fanatic, but oh my gosh, don't take it that far.
Yeah.
You talk about the lack of physical action. You were relatively big for a kicker.
Yeah,
So you're listed at 6'4".
That's right. Yeah, I was 6'4" and like 215 when I ended up playing. So that's pretty tall for a kicker. We had some others in the league. John Hall was a kicker at Wisconsin. He was 6'4". He was maybe 240, 250 or something. Our punter was 6'4", 260. We had a strange batch of people that came through who were larger than normal, but I think you're seeing the athleticism of the kicker position greatly improving over the last couple of decades, where it's not just who's the soccer player that we can have them come out and they'll figure out how to play the football rules later, just kick it through the uprights. It's now become very competitive, and some of the best athletes on the team are the kickers on some teams. Yeah. And some of them are world-class athletes that have just figured out that they're very good at this skill. So it's kind of been crazy to see the evolution of the kicking profession itself. When you can make millions of dollars a year, people are going to say, hey, it's worth it. And I don't get banged up and my knees aren't shot when I'm 45 or 50. I got a lot of my teammates that would tell me, when my kids get old enough, I'm going to call you and you're going to teach them how to kick, because they're not going to be a lineman.
Is there a parallel to golf when you think of like practicing this kicking motion and a golf swing, where I'm not a golfer, but there might be disadvantages for taller golfers because it's harder to maintain the consistency with longer limbs?
Yep. It's the trade-off of consistency and distance. And so I was taller, and I think that did help me kick the ball further. But it also was part of the reason I was inconsistent with my technique, because I guess there's more to kind of coordinate to get that repetitive motion down. So yeah, I think you see that with the golfers, that they can drive it really far, but they struggle maybe on the short game. But the analogy of golfing is identical almost, except for the ball's not stationary, except for like a kickoff. And a field goal, there's a motion and people are rushing you. So if they could simulate that on a golf course, then it would be identical to field goal kick. But yeah, the mechanics are very similar. It's the practice, often done by yourself, focusing on it. You know, if I was to change the way I practiced, I would have kicked fewer balls each time. I would have stopped after every kick and evaluated any mistakes or errors I made, and maybe looked at, was my placement off? Did I step it off incorrectly? Did I go too fast or too slow? Did my plant foot land in the correct spot each time? Instead, I would often I was mad that I missed it, and I line up and kick another one right away. And I never stopped and studied what went wrong. And I think that kind of ties back to our business discussion too, is
right.
We just want to move on to the next thing, and we don't want to go back and revisit why things failed or didn't work out right. And I think I would have been much more, my improvement would have been faster and better had I studied those mistakes and learned from them, instead of just trying to get it out of my head and move on to the next kick.
Yeah. It comes back to the process, not just the result, and maybe looking for the root cause, if you will, of, like you said, why did I miss that kick?
Yep. Because there's lots of variables.
Yeah.
There's lots of variables, from how quickly you step back, to your alignment when you step back at the angle, to how many steps you take over, the pace at which you move towards the ball, your foot placement, and then even the ball and how it's angled and positioned by the holder. There's a lot of little variables in there that doesn't take more. I've moved like half inches on some of those things, and it's made a difference in my kicking. Yeah. So it doesn't take much to get off a little bit.
Yeah. And just one other football memory that comes back here. Northwestern's kicker at the time, I don't know if you ever met him, Sam Valenzuezi. He was a pretty good kicker, but he was maybe 5'8", and he was on that Rose Bowl team. And the year later, frog in my throat. But he was known for, he made a lot of tackles. So he wasn't a real big guy, but he was maybe a little bit nuts. And he would run down and not be last line of defense tackle, but like he was really racing downfield with a head of steam. He wanted to make tackles. And then sadly, he wasn't able to play in the Rose Bowl game. He missed the last couple games of that season and the Rose Bowl. Because I think what happened was toward the end of a game against Wisconsin, there was a kickoff, and I think it was a touchback. And I think there was just this excited mood of the team and the winning and that game. And he jumped up in the air to celebrate the touchback, not points. For people who don't know football, he didn't score any points. It just means he kicked it out of the back of the end zone and the team couldn't return it. He jumped up to celebrate and landed wrong and really screwed up his knee.
Yep.
Kind of the mistake of celebrating something. So maybe to your point, Brian, of not getting too low, not getting too high could have helped him out there.
I think it was Martin Gramatica did that too. He blew
in the
out
NFL.
On a celebration, right? And so, and partly is you have different size shoes. You have a regular shoe and then you have a kicking shoe. And it's not meant for like running and sprinting and doing a lot of stuff other than kicking. Yeah. So now you're uneven a little bit, and then you're doing something you're not normally practicing doing, celebrating. And so, but I've seen that happen a lot, that people have injured themselves, and it's probably a little embarrassing for them to have that happen. But unfortunately, that you have a great season, you do everything right, and then something like that ruins your end of your season.
And again, it's one of those high visibility mistakes. I make a huge mistake here, I would edit it out. I mean, I don't always edit out my mistakes, but.
Yeah, it's a highlight tape version of everything, right? So I don't have all the mistakes and misses there.
Yeah. So maybe one other thing to drop back to something you said earlier, and then we'll before wrapping up. You talked earlier about, I'm paraphrasing, you kind of develop some bad habits without having a knowledgeable coach. There's risk of that happening in the type of work that you or I do today. So I was wondering if you could talk about the role of, what's called a master black belt in Lean Six Sigma. Is there risk that people who are earlier in their learning and development, if they're having to figure it out on their own, might also develop some bad habits without a coach?
Yeah, I think that applies for lots of things that, you don't realize, maybe you don't realize you need the coach or the benefits that the coach can provide, or it seems expensive to hire a coach, and you think that you'll get through it or figure it out, or and you don't realize what the struggle will be without it. And so until you go through it, and then you look back and say, that would have been nice for me to have someone there that could have guided me or corrected it and saved me a lot of struggle and frustration and mental anguish, I guess, to go through it. So I think it's difficult for people to recognize the need for the coach. But I think what really, stands out is when you look at people who are at the top of their games who still have coaches. Your Michael Jordans and LeBron James and Tiger Woods and Serena Williams, they all have coaches still, and yet they're the best in their sport at the time. And so why wouldn't any of us also require coaches to help us do our job better? And I think that's, I don't know if it looks like it's a weakness or something, or that you can say that you did it all by yourself, or there's some pride thing. But yeah, I think there's really, I personally probably need more coaches, and I'm not using enough coaches. So I think we can all look to, find somebody who's already done that, gone down the path, and can guide us in a way that allows us to learn, but also not forces us. Because I have had kicking coaches and camps I've gone to where they said, you will do it this exact way. And it didn't fit my body style or type. And I struggled with it, and it messed up my performance. And I think that's not a good use of a coach, where they tell you do it exactly like this, but instead say, here are the principles, here are the important elements and key points, and make sure that you hit those key points. How you get there can be left up to your own flexibility or preference or technique, but you have to have a common method of stepping off your steps. You have to have a consistent speed to the ball, and you have to place your foot in this other thing. Everything else, you could kick like Paul Ettinger of the Bears with a very unorthodox style, But if you do those key elements correctly, you'll be successful. And he was very successful. So I think, focusing on what is a really important thing that the coach can do, not do it exactly, or do it exactly like me, or do it exactly this way. I think that will not be successful.
And there are people in our professional realm who try coming about it that way also. I'm the expert. They might even use a word like sensei, and they'll say, yeah, don't question me, just do it this way. And like that in different ways can hamper somebody's development, or it might not be a fit.
Use this exact template in this exact form, and it has to look like this. And you're taking away, I think, the learning part of it, so they can develop and move past that coach. And I did a little bit of kicking and punting coaching later. I wasn't great at it. I don't think I was built for that. But the people I worked with, I tried to be very flexible and really just kind of hone in on, I'm not going to correct everything you do wrong. I'm just look for patterns in the thing I see repetitively done. I know you misstepped somewhere on there. I don't have to point that out to you. You can see that. But where I see that you're not doing something repetitively, I'm going to maybe highlight those things. And so, but I tried to not say, you need to study my tape and try to replicate what I did exactly. That would have been a disaster for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Brion, for sharing, perspectives from, this world that I don't know anything about, of, place kicking. And I'm sure it's, interesting perspective to hear some of your recollections there. And thank you also for connecting it to things that we face in other workplaces. So as we wrap up, again, our guest has been Brion Hurley. His podcasts are one, Lean Six Sigma Bursts. The second one is Lean Six Sigma for Good. There's a book of that same title. In a nutshell, what makes it Lean Six Sigma for Good? What kind of things do you cover on that podcast?
Yeah, so I started off focusing on environmental issues and applications of Lean and Six Sigma to work on things like energy reduction and water reduction and solid waste. And then as I was doing a little bit more work in Portland with volunteering with nonprofits, I kind of lumped all of that type of activity into a broader Lean Six Sigma for Good umbrella, where it's just, it's not so much focused on the businesses making more revenue or having better quarterly returns, but it's about, are we really solving social issues and important issues that affect everybody, that are the meaningful problems that we need to resolve? And so anything that's kind of like nonprofit based, government agency focused, and then other applications where the company's trying to reduce their carbon footprint or how much pollution they're generating. Those types of things that are, I think are really important problems that we need this type of thinking and skills to help resolve some of those issues. So I'm just finding people who have done some work in government or nonprofit work and trying to share some of their stories and hopefully motivate other of those organizations to learn a little bit more about these process improvement methods.
Well, good. Well, thank you. And I hope people will check that out. Lean Six Sigma for Good. And when it comes to coaching, or at least kind of like peer coaching, Brion and I are both involved in a group that we call Lean Communicators, where we get together and we try to help and coach each other out in kind of a informal, collaborative way. You can learn more about all of our podcasts at leancommunicators.com. So Brion, thank you for being a guest, and I'm really glad we could do this today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, inviting me. Thanks.